Hello YouTubers and Covalence students, we are here with a video talking about Redux Toolkit 2.0. Editors make some sound effects and post to make that sound better. So yeah, we are going to be previewing some of the changes here. I'll show you in a code along some cool changes to keep in mind in RTK 2.0, and I'll TLDR some of the behind the scenes changes, things like optimizations and bundle sizes and stuff like that. I came across this content recently myself. I do have Vanilla Redux implementation and Redux Toolkit implementation and labs in my React course that if you're interested in taking. There is a link in the description down below to our community membership that gets you access to my Zero to Hero React course, as well as Covalence's full stack program broken into a front end and back end course. So the two courses combined is our entire full stack development program with hundreds of hours of content and labs to complete to make you a rock star. And you'll also get access to me, my help, as well as my co-instructors and my coworkers and alumni here at Covalence's Discord community, where you can get some help, supportive help on your coding journey. So if you're interested in that stuff, take a look at the description down below for a link to that, as well as a companion repo for this. You're going to see 3 branches. Main, which will be the most up-to-date version of all these videos if I make more than one. The branch called Old Busted will be the vanilla RTK implementation, aka the pre-2.0 changes, and the branch called New Hotness will have all the code changes I do in this video. If you just want to grab them and read them and follow along, or if you want to grab the old branch and code it yourself, you're welcome to do so. Either way, the repo for this will also be in the description down below. So do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll talk more about at the end of the video. Let's dive on in. So I was browsing Reddit and found a couple days ago, a little over a week now, 9 days, that 2.0 of Redux Toolkit had released, and I found a comment left and this post made by acemarke, aka Mark Erickson, a moderator of the React and Redux subreddits, as well as several others. I think I should have taken a look at the list of the subreddits he moderates. I know it's at least React.js and Redux-oriented things. But this dude is awesome. He maintains the documentation for all these things. He helps contribute to Redux. I think he's a creator of Redux Toolkit, and he also contributes to React Redux. So, you know, if you want like a deep dive and more gospel reading approach, then this would be the way to go, checking out his comment history, his blog posts, and anything he has written about this content. Well, if you're actually reading the Redux Toolkit documentation and update changes itself, then you are reading probably his content anyway. So I do recommend you check him out on Reddit and follow him to make sure you can get some of the latest comments and advice and tips and Q&As he does across these subreddits as he moderates and comments on them. So Mark Erickson, like I said, he's involved with all this stuff. You can find his blog as well. If you just search Mark Erickson with a K on Google, you'll find him and everything he does. This is impressive stuff, impressive work. You know, big kudos to him. I didn't know who he was when I was a newbie like 5 or 6 years ago, but I would see acemarke pop up pretty regularly on my React.js subreddit when I learned about React and joined here just to be up to date on news and stuff like that, and like the latest comings and goings to the framework. You know, I've always seen this name pop up, and it was always incredibly helpful, and now that I've actually done my research on who this is, I know why. So we are looking at a Vite project I have up and running where I installed Redux Toolkit, the newest version, and React Redux and Bootstrap to get this thing styled up. This is very simple. I have a thunk that executes a fetch request for me to the JSON placeholder API with my favorite name, Irvin Howell. This is just a array I'm managing in state that I can add my own custom names to if I want to, and I can remove them as I see fit. It's all very straightforward. Few reducers, one slice, one feature. Let's take a look at the vanilla code and then begin upgrading and talking about the RTK latest features, right? So I'm going to try and demystify some of the new changes for you newbies out there that are coming across this, and how they're going to impact what you're writing as well as what's happening behind the scenes, right? So we're going to be seeing how they integrate slices into, thunks into slices, how you now can have slices in your selectors in your slices. I swear I'll get that right in the 3rd try. And then in your slices, you're going to have a new syntax requirement for extraReducers and a few other things as well. So like I said, this is our Vite project. You can find the description the repo in the description down below if you want to link to it. Remember, you have the new hotness, all the code changes that this video is going to do, old busted, which is this starting point right here, and a more common approach to what you've been writing with RTK already, right? There is a bit more of boilerplate overhead, state access complexity, and some fragmented code structure with the way you've had to write things up until this point. It is a very simple project invite. I simply burned everything out. I have your common setup for your React Redux provider and the configured store from Redux Toolkit. Nothing new here. In our store configuration file, it's very simple. We have a implicit call to our combine reducers function that RTK's configure store can automatically do for us without having to write our own combine reducer code. This little shorthand object syntax will do it for us. I have one slice, aka our users reducers. If we take a look at that, which is where I was at a moment ago. We see I have a thunk created here. It follows a naming convention that this slice is going to do. Well, if you recall, what's cool about Thunks is they have access to the Thunk API, which will have the ability to have access to my Redux store and the methods associated with it, things like getState, dispatch, etc. This will allow me to wrap this asynchronous code. And when that asynchronous code is done, it will then dispatch this action to my store because, again, dispatch actions to a Redux store must be synchronous in nature and must keep state immutable. They can only interact with the global state tree via the methods provided. Almost like you're interacting with a bank teller. You can't go back to the vault and just grab whatever money you want. You fill out a slip, you talk to the teller, they go through their protocol and procedure, and that's how you're going to withdraw money. Same way with state and actions in a Redux store. You follow the procedure in front of you. You can't just go in there and mess with it all willy-nilly. And one of those things is it's got to be synchronous, which is why Thunks are an answer to that problem, how you can handle asynchronous actions and dispatch them to your store synchronously after they're done. A slice represents the entirety of your state, as you probably know if you know some RTK. We have our common properties, name, initial state, and our reducers, which are just functions that take a state and an action, and that action can update that state. And remember, you have to keep it immutable, but you're saying, Luke, this doesn't look immutable. Don't forget, RTK uses immer beneath the hood. Immer allows us to write mutative style code that will again get transpiled, I believe, or interpreted as non-immutable code, meaning this will actually be run correctly and not mutate the code. So it allows us to write mutative, simple-looking code, and it actually gets run correctly once we get into runtime. So yeah, this is all fairly straightforward, fairly simple if you're familiar with RTK. If not, there are other videos on my YouTube channel where I demo how it works, I think from complete scratch. And I also have a course, again, a little self-plug here, a course that goes over all this stuff from an empty project to a built-out Redux store, configured and adding React and all that fun stuff. Yeah. So, these things are separate, and I've gotten used to writing these things this way. If I had a selector here, it would also be written down here at the bottom as a standalone function I would export out as a selector. But nevertheless, the selector is all very simple. It just returns my state of users. This is my global state from the Redux store. This is the .users part in my configured store where I had reducers, users, user reducer over here in index. That's where we consider this our global store state .users, and the way I've coded this like a doofus is I had another .users property down here. This could be like .data or .value, might have been a better name, but it is what it is. That's how we wind up with this goofy selector of state.users to get the actual array itself to map through and display. The actions are all fairly straightforward. I can add a new user by passing in this object or this action payload right here. I can dispatch an action to delete a user. It's a simple filter. And then this is my thunk running an action here. Remember, dispatch will be stable across re-renders. So this is a outside of my use effect dependency that I should add to my array dependency because it's something on the outside that's depending on rerunning. But between re-renders, dispatch from RTK, or for React Redux rather, not RTK, from React Redux should be stable across re-renders. So this is not going to cause an infinite loop of re-rendering happening. We can confirm this by just going to our Redux tools here. And yeah, we can see that we're not executing a constant number of fetch users or infinite number of fetch users where I get rate limited by JSON placeholder. So yeah, it's all fairly straightforward RTK stuff. So let's go ahead and start talking about some of the changes that we have to be aware of in RTK 2.0. Let's go, right? So one of the first things you saw via a comment that I scrolled by casually earlier, but now I'm going to actually address it, which is, well, we can no longer use this object shorthand key syntax with these square brackets here in our extraReducers. I would actually have to install the old version or a previous version of Redux Toolkit in order to even write it. This is not even like a migrate style change or like, hey, it's deprecated, so we're gonna alert you and you should change it. This is what you do now. So if you do have an existing project with RTK and you want to bump the version up, keep in mind that might be a lot of refactoring in your extraReducers. The reducers themselves aren't going to change, it's just the code surrounding them. So we can't use this object shorthand syntax anymore. We are required to do what's called this builder syntax, right? So it gives us a improved readability. Now, it feels like it's a little bit more code to write, but believe me, the readability is good. And the biggest thing that I love that RTK does is that this syntax gives us such strong TypeScript support, particularly when you're handling multiple action types that aren't coded as just reducers on your slice. So the builder syntax is just a stronger way to do things. The documentation pre 2.0 even says that, hey, you have the option of doing either object key syntax or builder syntax, but it strongly recommends builder syntax, and it looks like that strong recommendation has just gone to, no, you should just do it this way, homie, which I respect that, you know, to make a actions and consequences is what it's all about. They decided to do something, and now we're gonna all deal with the consequences, and the consequences good TypeScript support for a little extra code writing, right? So it gives us just better maintainability, and it's just, again, readability and TypeScript support is what it's all about. So when you're handling multiple action types, it just involves more expressive code. And it's just really a matter of just writing in your extraReducers, going from this simple object syntax. We provide a function callback that returns this builder that this gives us a parameter, this builder function, which gives us properties of add case, which are methods that take your extraReducers, aka things that could happen outside this slice, like a thunk, that give you then access to the standard reducer function of Redux, aka a function that takes a state and an action and returns an updated version or a new state based on that action without modifying the original. That's all reducer is. It's just a function. So yeah. That's all that's going on here. That's the only big difference. I'm going to leave this comment in here so you can see what we went from and what we went to. And like I said, I was too lazy to install a previous version because this actually will error out and I'll get a VS Code error saying this is not going to work. And my whole Redux app comes crashing down and I'd have to code it before I can even show you the simplicity of how it works. So the other big thing is that, again, we can now include thunks inside of our actual reduce or slice itself. So, you know, up until this point, we've always had to keep our thunks written separately as an action that we then import and dispatch like usual. But it wasn't ever actually written inside of our slices. And now I know that I thought, why can't we just add it in there? When I first started learning RTK, eventually you just get used to this pattern, get used to thinking this way and coding this way. But I have no doubt that the RTK maintainers and creators and people that work on it receive probably a slew of feedback that says, hey, it would make more sense if I can include my thunk in my slice because it's directly related, right? The thunk calls something asynchronous for this slice to use. So it's like, dog, this just makes sense. So why not do it this way? Like, why don't we do it this way? But it causes some problems that they have some compromise and solutions to. I don't have the RTK 2.0. Yeah, here we go. It's a quick search. So they have an entire doc for migrating. So it's if you just Google RTK 2.0, this is the first link I found. Just look for migrating RTK 2.0 in Redux, and you'll probably find this article. Or I can just remember, Luke, to link it in the description down below. Mods, we'll add that later in post, right? Talking to myself. I don't know. I don't have an editing team. It's me. I'm the editor, and I don't even like editing. That's why I try and just one-shot all these videos with minimal edits. So they talk about in more in-depth the problems they run into and the solutions and compromises they come up with, specifically about including thunks inside of a slice. Because again, one of the biggest questions you could think of is, hey, if we're going to be adding thunks into our slice and we're going to allow that, how are we going to do that, right? How are we going to, yeah, here we go. How are we actually going to add our thunks in there, right? Because we have to agree the syntax of how we're going to do this. So here's like their problems and their compromises that they're talking about here. So, they that uncertainty of syntax leaves a big question mark around it. They all probably have, if we're going to add this new recipe of adding thunks into slices, we're like, okay, this is a new recipe in the cookbook. We know what the ingredients are, but how do we combine them to make this recipe really soar? Like, how do we mix these things up? And you might have different individuals say, well, no, you should add these ingredients in this order. Someone else can say, no, these ingredients in this slightly different order results in a little bit something better, I think. I mean, it's up to interpretation. So we all want the code to be written easily, and we want it to be readable and have TypeScript support. So how do we implement thunks and slices without having issues? The other big problem they talk about is this right here, this point 2, which is having type inference drama, basically. Thunks, they need to get their hands on getState and dispatch. Like I said, they had access to that Thunk API, but there's a catch on that because the types come from the Redux store. So remember, when I talked about the Thunk having access to the Redux store methods of Thunk API, getState, and dispatch, those are on the Redux store. And technically, when you're creating a slice, you are making a slice of state that eventually gets combined as a reducer into our store. And that's what the types come from for getState and dispatch that this has to have access to. We have a chicken and egg scenario, right? What happens if I make a Thunk inside of a slice? The Thunk needs to have access to the store's types, but technically it's not created yet until it gets imported and configured over here and the application actually is combined and runs and combined. So it's like, well, hold on now, we have a bit of an issue. The Thunk needs to have access to those types. They're not technically available here, but they are available after the store is created. So it's like, well, which one do we do first? So that's going to be one of the tricky problems we're going to have to get around, and then that leads us to an import problem as well. CreateSlice, as of right now, small bundle size, fast to run, pretty simple, pretty standard to set up. The question is, do we now add this new ball and chain onto CreateSlice that will automatically allow you to add thunks if you want them, but that means all of your slices are going to have that ball and chain on it, dragging it down, making it a bigger bundle size, less optimized, less performant. So it's like, well, do we make another kind of slice that now has thunks integrated, or what do we do? How do we do this? Do we make that decision, right? It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We don't want every slice to be heftier just because you may need to add thunks. So they have a transition to that solution where they're going to have their own custom wrapper around CreateSlice that will give you thunk accessibility should your slice need them. So CreateSlice is still going to be this sleek, fast little roadster if you need it. And then if you need something a bit more heavy duty for some heavy lifting and need a truck, you can wrap CreateSlice in your own custom version of it that gives a slice creator with the ability to create and understand thunks from within it, right? So that's what it's going to do, right? They have a custom version of CreateSlice. It's going to be specifically tailored to let us define those thunks where we want them with a little extra code at the beginning. Then, the other big thing about what they're going to be implementing here that I'll show you in the code along in just a moment is how do we actually add these thunks into our reducers and our extraReducers and things like that. They actually have something similar to what we see down here, this builder function call. We're going to have another new way of taking our reducers and writing them called the creator callback approach, right? So it's like the builder pattern you might have seen in CreateAPI, in RTK queries, CreateAPI, or even our builder pattern we see down here in extraReducers. It's like finding the right key for a lock after trying out a bunch. It's what they decide is going to be the way to do it, that creator callback syntax. That allows you to somewhat customize your types. They talk about it down here where they say, you can customize the types by just getting around them when needed by doing a manual cast and as thing. So getState as my type. You can do some type overriding like that, some type assertions using the as keyword, because you can't really customize state or dispatch, but you can do things in the intermediate, like in between states of just saying, hey, I'm going to cast this as a certain thing because I know what I need to do and what it's going to be, right? So it gives us some customization of types. We can't overhaul state and dispatch, but we do have a little bit of manual typecasting carrying the load here. So they gave us some wiggle room on type inference and things like that and control over it. So yeah. It's a bit of a journey. I know it's been a lot of talking about the changes, not a lot of coding as of quite yet, but it's definitely worth the trip, and it's a lot friendlier to work with what I've been telling you going on, like, ruminating in your head, or maybe some perusing you've done on your own of the changes here, whether through his TLDR updates written here on the React.js subreddit, or from the documentation you might have paused and read here, right? So before I get into selectors and things like that, let's see if we can switch up some of our syntax around here and get coding. So let's see. I do indeed have some notes I'm trying to read off of here, because every time I've tried to make this video, I get lost in my thinking and it gets very scattered. So, I know this video is going to run long. There's no way I can make this like a 10-minute TLDR video without skipping a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, so we're going to go ahead and, we're going to do something similar to this, where our extraReducers has this builder style syntax. I already have 2.0 version of RTK installed. Basically, if you do just npm I at redux.js/toolkit, you will install the newest 2.0 and whatever minor versions are already out. So we need to switch our reducers to this creator builder syntax. I'm going to comment this out for now. It's going to cause some errors. What we're going to do is we're going to write reducers. We know that we now have that create syntax that allows us, I'm pretty sure I need a comma after that, that allows us to now have access to this creator callback syntax. So what we're going to do is write our reducers as they were before. And I'll even show you how to do a prepared reducer down for this one as well. So we're going to write a delete user property. We're going to take the creator and say, hey, create a new reducer for this property. There we go. Let's go ahead and write out our syntax here for our newer students that aren't used to all these parentheses and curly braces everywhere. We're going to write our reducer, and then we're going to write our code just like before, and we're going to say, hey, the state of the state.users, which is the array, is going to be state.users.filter, which is actually a non-mutative function. It should return a new array to us. Find each user whose ID does not match the action.payload. So remember, when I click on delete user in the browser, that dispatches an action with an action payload. That is the ID of the user I'm trying to quote unquote delete from my list, which all it does is it loops through the array and filters out the one that I clicked on and then reassigns that value right here. And that's all it does. So it's pretty straightforward. So next is going to be our prepared reducer. So I wanted to show y'all what this looks like. And basically a prepared reducer is like having a reducer with an extra step that does something before the function is called. Meaning, the prepared part allows us to encapsulate some logic in like creating a new object. Like I'd argue that this creation of the ID is simple enough on the new user object, but we can use a prepared reducer to encapsulate the logic for creating a new user and simply returning it and allowing our reducer to be even more simple, right? So the first function will be something that receives some input like our action payload, and it can do something and return a new action object after some modifications or data restructuring or validate or whatever you need, really, right? And that's a great use of a prepared reducer. And the second argument will be the function that is the actual reducer, similar to the one that we're going to already have seen used in our create reducer. So it's basically used to process or prepare data before you actually update your state with it, for example. So let's go ahead and really engineer this by adding a new one here. And it's going to be a call. It's going to call this add user, just like a one down yonder. Again, this is we're going to break this into two steps now. We're going to have our creator function make a prepared reducer for us here. The prepared reducer, like I said, it takes two. So make sure I get my syntax correct here. Pretty sure that's what we're going to do. Yeah, that feels right. So the second part, like I said, is our actual reducer itself, just like before, meaning it takes a state, it takes an action, and it updates that state in some form or fashion. In our case, state.users.push our new user. But in this case, rather than creating the new user like I do in my previously commented out code that comes by default in the old busted branch, we are going to push our action payload in there directly because it should already be prepared. Its data integrity and structure, formatting, whatever, has been checked and updated and being passed into this reducer beforehand. So again, this function first, we haven't coded out yet, is going to be what it's going to intercept as our action payload, which we can call our user. That's what's basically intercepting whatever we're passing in, which again is a example here in our new user dispatch. is taking an object that has a property called name. New username comes from a controlled React input, right? So that's all it is. That's what it's intercepting. It's intercepting our user object and needs to run some code on it. So what it's going to do is exactly what we saw down yonder. I'm going to make a new user. That's going to be our current object that will have a property called ID, which will be a nano ID. I didn't install nano ID. Nano ID is used by Redux Toolkit, and if you didn't know, it is re-exported for us to use in our own code. So it's really nifty to have here. So we're going to make that our nano ID, and then from there, whatever object we passed in is going to be our we're going to spread those properties out to maintain whatever our user object happens to be. So now that I've made my new user, all I need to do is write return our action object with the payload property represented by our new user. And unless I've messed something up, hopefully not, my format hotkeys you saw there, just new line indented, verticaled, and remove some parentheses. I like to have it use shorthand wherever possible. But this is our prepared reducer. What it will do is we'll do some data, restructuring, return an action object with our payload property on it that will then be intercepted right here. Well, not intercepted, or rather passed along to our actual reducer that allows us to keep our code simple. So this encapsulates the logic of preparing our data structure. This encapsulates the logic of just how we update state. Little overkill for this simple example, but I wanted to show y'all how this syntax works now with our create builder syntax. It's important to know and see how that works. Okay. Next is, how do we actually add our AsyncThunk, right, into our slice? Because like I told y'all, CreateSlice is no longer how we do it. We need to actually change up or add some imports here. So I'm going to add and then modify this in just a moment. So I'm going to add another one before or after nano ID. Doesn't really matter. We're going to add one called buildCreateSlice and one called AsyncThunk Creator. Those are going to be our new imports that we're going to be utilizing here. So I think their names kind of make sense. BuildCreateSlice means we're building a custom version of CreateSlice with some custom creators we have access to. Oh, so it's almost like we are adding features to this create function, like it's written to take new features depending on what we need. So basically we need to wrap our CreateSlice in some kind of call that says, hey, build a custom heftier CreateSlice with new features. That creator function needs to handle async thunks. So basically it's, how do we add async thunks onto this creator builder syntax? That's what we're going to be trying to do. So what we're going to say is const create slice with thunks. So this build create slice is building a create slice custom function. So basically it's replacing this call to the vanilla create slice with one that's wrapped in our custom required functionality. So we're going to assign create slice with thunks with our build create slice function call. It'll take an object as its argument. Let's hope, even though I'm not in a TypeScript project, let's hope that VS Code's IntelliSense kicks on. Let's go. Has a creators property saying, hey, what creators are you adding to that creator builder syntax? Because you can add multiple, but we are adding one in particular, one called AsyncThunk, and it's going to use the import AsyncThunk creator. So there is I'm going to format everything. I use prettier and some custom rules, so everything just formatted vertically instead. Create slice with thunks is now our new way of calling create slice that is now coded to receive and understand what async thunks are inside the slice. So this is what our syntax now looks like. I probably should have done this first, I realized, so you guys realize where the creator syntax now came from, but that's fine. There you go. So there's create slice with thunks added on there. All these properties are the same. We have the new creator builder syntax we've already been demoing and looking at. That should be just fine. And leaving that in there, and we have our extraReducers. Our extraReducers are actually now going to change. So while these were here for things that were related but came from outside the slice, aka thunks, they're no longer going to be, they are extraReducers, but they're no longer going to be coded in such a fashion. And so my cat Percy is now on the desk, so if you see him come say hello, he might come say hello if he's feeling cheeky or wants to ruin this recording like he tends to. I'm going to move all these comments down below, so I'm tired of scrolling up and down here. But we should be able to, after these reducers, be able to define async thunks, right? So they're not going to be in, I don't think anyway. Actually, it might be. I think it needs to be inside of here. Yeah. So okay, it does go in our reducers property right here. So this will be a reducer because it needs access to the creator builder syntax. Luke, come on, man. We're going to make a new property. We're going to call it fetch users. This is going to be our thunk that's now, this is it, y'all, added into our slice. The whole purpose of this, the big change. Create is the creator builder syntax dot, and it should be coded on with async thunks because of what we coded and added up here with our imports, right? We've now imported the thunk creator and added it to our custom create slice. CreateAsyncThunk is going to be a function we're going to call here, and it will take, just like before, 2 args. It should be our function we're going to be running, as well as our extra reducers, like our pending states and things like that. I'm pretty sure is the syntax we're looking at here. I'm going to use async await, so we're going to add the async keyword here. We don't need the first parameter to the two thunks, which I'm not going to talk about because that's not the scope of this video. But if you wanted to use the thunk API, this is what you're looking at. So you can already see this is similar to our first usage of CreateAsyncThunk, just without having to do the name. And this allows us to write the same or similar style code, which I'm just going to copy and paste here for simplicity, so I don't typo JSON placeholder like I have in a previous video that I didn't want to edit and just redid it. So what are you going to do? There is our lovely thunk right there. That's the code that's going to run. And then now is where we get to say, hey, we have a couple different states we want to manage on this thing. So that's what I'm talking about. So from here, it's going to be what y'all are used to writing, which would be, hey, in the state it's pending, set loading to true. In the case it's rejected, here's our reducer for that. These are our extra reducers for this thunk. We're coding it along inside here with CreateAsyncThunk. We're going to simply assign that error from whatever error happens, and technically loading is also done. I mean, it's no longer loading, right? It's rejected. Then we can have our fulfilled state, where we're going to have our state action, and then we'll have our state.users equals our action.payload. The action payload in this case is whatever returns from our thunk, aka the promise that is we await to resolve of the streaming body of data JSON response that comes from our fetch request. So yeah, that's the action payload. That's the correspondence between those right there. We return that. This becomes the action payload. Assign that to users when this promise state is fulfilled. So if you see now, this is the syntax they've decided on. Using the creator builder syntax allows us to customize that creator builder function with an async thunk function that our slice will now understand what it is. This, remember, gives us some wiggle room on type via typecasting. So if we do a thunk API.getState, we can do a typecast as needed. That's the wiggle room we have here for type inference, right? We do our thunk at our asynchronous stuff as normal. Return, that's going to be our fulfilled action payload and your common pending and rejected states that you need to manage if you want to do that. I don't do anything in my component about that because it's just overkill for this demo, but I wanted to show y'all what all this syntax looked like, right? So now we need to adjust our actions because this export up here is something we no longer need to do. So I'm going to remove this fetch users export. I'm going to fix up my import list. I don't need CreateSlice or CreateAsyncThunk anymore because I'm now going to use the two combo of buildCreateSlice and AsyncThunk creator to do that instead. We're going to scroll on down to the bitty bottom to add and adjust our list of actions because now our list of actions will include, surprise, our fetch users action. So that shouldn't change anything up here in terms of our feature import, which is very nice. And yeah, so from there we should be able to, let's see, I mean, unless I have missed something, which is a distinct possibility. Hey, look at that. We now have our newest syntax of, here, Percy. Say hello to the crowd. Say hello to YouTube because this video is already 33 minutes long at this point, and it's longer than I wanted, but talking about all these changes and not coding them is ludicrous, and also not coding anything or showing y'all how to code along with it is also ludicrous. So this is just examining our 2.0 changes. All right, what I was trying to say is nothing changes in our react-redux code. This, do they still work? So let's take please work is the new user because I'm praying it still works. Hey, all right, let's go. So yeah, we have altered all of our syntax on over, and everything still works as expected. It still runs a thunk, but the thunk is now coded directly into our slice, a feature we wanted for a while. And our normal stuff works as it should. So there are no changes to the code other than the syntax and the improvements of what it offered to us. There is yet another feature that we have available in Redux Toolkit 2.0, which is the inclusion of selectors directly in our slices. A small quality of life feature that also just gets us better compartmentalized code, and it also gets us more readable, maintainable code, because all things related to that slice will now be in the slice itself. So this new feature does not require you to do this. The vanilla CreateSlice function will allow you to do this, so do not get confused thinking you need to add this CreateSlice with Thunks ability to add this next thing I'm about to show you. Vanilla CreateSlice will be just fine. What you need to now, or what you can now do rather, is, I don't remember where this comma goes. Yeah, I love IntelliSense. We now have the ability to add a selectors object to our slice. Let me collapse this so y'all can see what it looks like. There we go. So we have our normal, again, this could just be a vanilla CreateSlice, it's fine. Selectors has been added to slices in general, right? Not just the custom one we've made. But a selector gives us some stronger type inference as well, I'm assuming, where we can write our selector. We're going to call it GetUsers. It's going to return this slice's state. So unlike our selector up here from useSelector, we're not looking at the global state. We are looking at this particular slices state, not global state. So its state, aka this thing dot users. So we're going to say, hey, this is going to return. We're going to do an implicit one-line return. Return the users array. Return the users array from this slices state in this selector. So now I need to export this selector. We're going to add it to the bottom of our exported list of our ducks pattern. Our ducks pattern means we have our, there we go. We have, stop it. We have our default is the reducer, and our named are now going to be our selectors and our actions, just like you would always do. But now we have it all conveniently coded into the slice itself, which is a benefit, I think, a strong benefit to having your code encapsulated pretty well there. So we're going to add this to our import list along with add, delete, fetch, and get users. I'm going to still call useSelector, but we're simply going to pass it the name of our function GetUsers that will run it at runtime. It'll go get all this stuff, and it should not change anything in terms of what we see in the browser. It still works as expected. I just refreshed to make sure my Redux list wasn't like overpopulated with stuff here. But yeah, we got our pending and we got our fulfilled. You see 2 running here. That's not because I have a bug in my code. It's because in my Vite project in main, we have React strict mode on, which means everything renders twice in development for debugging purposes and things like that. A lot of the times you're not worried about things re-rendering in React. You're worried about why aren't they re-rendering or something like that. So the double re-render is not that big of a problem. It's not a problem at all. It's not a bug, it's a feature. So that's why you see double logs here, or rather double actions being pulled. So yeah, it's working. Our selector is still selecting this particular piece of state, and it is more strongly written as a selectors property inside of the field, inside of the user's slice itself. So I think that's pretty dang cool of all the cool things we can do with RTK 2.0. So the big ones are selectors are now just available inside of slices. You can now build a custom version of CreateSlice with new features. So basically in the creator function callback syntax, we can add the ability for it to understand create.asyncthunk. That is where that comes from, by the way, if you're wondering how we got there to create.asyncthunk. We basically added it as a feature onto this custom slice. We then create this custom slice with the ability to understand what thunks are. We now have them available in our list of reducers as well. We can add that as a property, as a reducer, because it is create.asyncthunk. Write our thunk code as usual. We can now add our extraReducers as an object of different states of our thunk happening right there. The most common usage of thunks anyway, the asynchronous code. And it allows us, there's some pretty cool things, like it's things that have been requested and what they've done. So, like the way I think of this is almost like a spaceship that has like an instrument panel we're looking at, and the spaceship has manuals and tools to adjust the instruments we're looking at. And you have the tools to adjust the instruments and our manuals in separate location, right? So the instruction manuals are like the slices, and the tools are like our thunks. And they have them in different drawers all over the place. So you're trying to imagine if you're trying to modify or read your instrument panel, and you have to run across the ship in that direction to get your tools, but back in that direction to get to your manuals to read them, to try to fix something on your spaceship. it's not a lot of fun doing all that running back and forth, right? That back and forth hassle is a real pain. And that's what we've been doing here, right? So that's been the problem here. And this all-in-one toolbox is nifty in React 2.0 that they added all this into slices. So basically it's taken a way of combining our manuals and tools in separate areas, combining them into one drawer. It's like having a smart toolbox where everything we need is going to be right at our fingertips with these changes in 2.0. It's like they've given us like this cool adaptive tool rack that not only knows what tool we need, but the one where to put it back when we're done with it, etc., aka what these thunks are inside of our manuals, aka our slices. So think of these changes as like the ability to now have this adaptive tool rack of tools and manuals, and it knows where everything goes. So it's good for, you know, code clarity, all that kind of fun stuff. And yeah, this is the final thing. This is the code I'm going to push to our new hotness branch. I did mention that we're going to TLDR some of the other things that are included in RTK as well. Again, you could look at all these specifics here. I tried to give y'all a TLDR version and a version with analogies and writing by example. They have examples obviously in their code here, but you know, I know that when I was in y'all's shoes as a newbie and I didn't know too much about Redux or the tools I was using, it was just nice to have somebody TLDR these things for me. So packaging and performance, big thumbs up to them for a lot of improved packaging, tons of new packaging stuff that they talk about down here in their changes. There are better performance, smaller bundle sizes thanks to ESM and CJS compatibility, and Immer 10.0. They have a lot of performance issues as well. Faster, leaner. Welcome to coding. Welcome to Agile. We are all trying to put out the fire that we deployed. The burning trash heap we deployed, we're all trying to put out the fire and make it better. Welcome to Agile development, faster and leaner. That's the way it goes. Huge shout out for them being TypeScript fans, or at least respecting TypeScript coders. Redux got a makeover. Say goodbye to any action and say hello to unknown action. That's going to be a big replacement for us TypeScript RTK and Redux users. Action types are now strictly strings. Remember that. Cleaner typing all the way through is important. New features. There's a combine slices method, which I didn't really comment on here because there wasn't a whole lot I could show off with it here, but it's a slick way to dynamically load reducers, right? So think of that. Think of that as a change up to allow you to lazy load what reducers you might need, because you may not need to load your entire Redux global state and store right on page load. You might have it lazy load certain parts only when those components are in view or something like that if they're about to be mounted, right? So yeah, there's some changes to the custom React hooks for React Redux, I believe. You'll need to group all three hooks together now. And there's other related libraries like React Redux now needs React v18. So anyone starting with a new Vite or Vite project, you're probably already going to have it. Anyone that is wanting to upgrade those things, remember to have just the newest versions of these dependencies installed as well. So you're going to need v18 and higher in order to use the newest version of React Redux and the stuff they've improved here, right? So yeah, that's really about it. So as always, I hope y'all appreciated the little journey here. I know it was a lot of talking for not that much code, but again, I wanted y'all to understand the purpose and the reasoning of the decisions that they made in order for us to have this new syntax unlocked and usable inside of our slices. So it was a lot of talking for a little bit of code. I know I've gotten comments on that kind of stuff before, but I hope you appreciated my breakdown and my take on the changes, what's going to affect you writing the code the most, and the TLDR of like your performance and optimization changes that are going to be just appreciated in the background. Like I said, I wanted y'all to know why these changes happen and not just what they are. So I try to make it a little bit different than maybe others that might just cover what changed. I wanted to try and also add my take on why the changes are beneficial or not beneficial, for example. But yeah, as always, do the YouTube things, like this video, leave a comment down below if you want me to cover anything else in RTK 2.0. If you have interest in building RTK stuff with me, I don't mind doing another small series on that. Check our YouTube channel for any Redux-oriented content as is. I know there's like a 2-hour-long webinar that I did for a student in our curriculum where I showed them how to implement Redux, just vanilla Redux, into a empty project directory that I start as a node project. I do an npm init, and then I build it all the way up to a full Redux store in console logs, and then I add React, and then I add React Redux, and then I bring it all together by displaying it all in the DOM. So from 0 to hero on vanilla Redux, if you want to learn the terminology that I've been throwing out here. If you weren't familiar with all of it, I do meme that Redux is a terminology battle first and foremost. And if you understand the terms, understanding how it's pieced together really isn't that bad. But yeah, use the description down below. Check for all the relevant links. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next video.